Privet moi druzy. Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes, and I go over these daily updates trying to help you stay informed on what's going on in Ukraine. Today we're going to talk about Russian military strategy, how they lie about actions, and I spent a lot of time on that yesterday, so I'm going to be brief. How they play defense in order to save face, and that's not helping them achieve their agenda. How Ukraine split with Russia. We're going to go back a bit historically, and then we're going to look to the future and ask ourselves, will this be a long war, or will it be over in 2023, or how's this going to go? We'll talk briefly about the U.S. House rules and the potential impact on Ukraine, and then we'll end with fun with Russian state media. So yesterday I showed you this article in RT. More than 600 Ukrainian troops were killed in retaliation operation, said Moscow. This general is essentially lying. And we know that he's lying because it could be independently verified from Western media sources. Here, Ukraine denies Russians' claim that it killed hundreds of soldiers. Here's Euronews. Moscow claims to have carried out a massive missile strike in Kramatorsk that left up to 600 soldiers dead. But the mayor of Kramatorsk said that there had been no deaths from the strikes over the weekend. And I even showed you a Reuters article which showed a man standing right next to the crater near the building that didn't hold military officers, that wasn't blown up. And, well, okay, Russia lies. And we know that they lie. Now, they create a problem when they lie. So here, this is the ISW's assessment yesterday. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced on January 8th that Russian forces conducted this retaliatory operation. Russian Ministry of Defense falsely claimed a retaliatory strike targeted several temporary Ukrainian deployment points. A Finnish reporter visited the site of the strike in Kramatorsk on January 8th and noted that it hit an empty school. Several Russian mill bloggers responded negatively to the Russian Ministry of Defense claim, pointing out that the Russian Ministry of Defense, now listen to this, the Russian Ministry of Defense frequently presents fraudulent claims and criticizing Russian military leadership for fabricating a story to retaliate. Now, they know that they're lying. It's just like I was talking about with the Alexander Solzhenitsyn quote, we know they're lying, they know they're lying, they know we know they're lying, we know they know we know that they're lying, but they're still lying. That's just the way it works. So when they lie about this, why wouldn't they lie about that? When you lie, you create a condition where we can't believe whatever you say in the future moving forward, and that's where they are right now. But they do more than just lie. Here's the the UK intelligence update, and they talked about since at least June of 2022, Russian aerospace forces have almost certainly used Su-57 felons. Great name for the plane, felons. That's kind of what's going on here, to conduct missions against Ukraine. These missions have likely been limited to flying over Russian territory, launching long-range air-to-surface and air-to-air missile strikes in Ukraine. Why? They're terrified of having these new generation planes struck down. Russia is highly likely prioritizing avoiding reputational damage, reduced export prospects, and the compromise of sensitive technology, which would come from any loss of a felon over Ukraine. This is symptomatic of Russia's continued risk-averse approach to employing its air force in the war. So they're not actually supporting the troops that they need to be able to support with air power in order for the troops to be able to advance. And I say that's a great thing, but they're not doing it because they're risk-averse. And that's part of how the Russians are conducting this war. Now, how's the war going? Ukraine says that it continues to turn back Russian offenses in the east. And in actuality, the Russians are making a slight advance above Bakhmut, north of Bakhmut. They're taking some farmland around there, but they're really not making the progress that they should be making given their capacity. Ukraine keeps repelling them. Ukraine has been very smart about how they're defending themselves, and they continue to repel these attacks. But I'm showing you this article not just to say that, but because I want to show you this at the very end. Russia's invasion has caused the largest wave of refugees since World War II. About 8 million people have left the country, and about 6 million are internally displaced. That's a lot of people that have been disrupted by this. Now, let's look at the background, the causes of this. Ukraine's nation-building progress spells doom for Putin's Russian Empire. I think that's great news. I don't think the next article is great news, but I think this article is great news. So, here's what it had to say. Modern Ukraine's civilizational split from authoritarian Russia began with the country's December 1991 referendum, which produced a landslide vote in favor of Ukrainian independence. That's right, 1991. Do you want to stay with Russia? No, that's okay. Lithuania had gone, Poland had gone, other Baltic states have gone, and this was a time where when they had the chance, as the first chance that these states had to get away from the Soviet Union, they fled. They ran to the arms of NATO eventually, most of them, right? So that's what's going on here. Then you have Ukraine's 2004 Orange Revolution and 2014 Revolution of Dignity, the Maidan Revolution. Now, this is interesting. Crucially, both revolutions were grassroots movements, that's part one, and they were sparked by Russian interventions, that's part two. So anytime that Russia tries to get closer, tries to get their hooks back in them, they're like, no, we don't want that, and they run away. Another crucial turning point in Ukraine's nation-building journey was the annexation of Crimea in 2014. When Crimea was annexed, a lot of sentiment toward Russia, positive sentiment toward Russia, evaporated. Now, there was still some positive sentiment toward Russia in the most eastern end of the country, especially amongst the Russians who were there. But in general, it's evaporated. As relations with Russia have deteriorated, ties with global Ukrainian diaspora have flourished. That's diaspora are people that have fled the country or gone to, say, the U.S. or Europe or whatever. Since February 2022, Ukraine's historic turn toward the West has been dramatically reinforced by the previously unimagined horrors of Russia's full-scale invasion, Bucha, and other war crimes. So this movement toward the West has been accelerated by Russia's intervention in 2022. They got quick on making sure all the paperwork was into the EU. They're trying to get into NATO. They're accelerating it because every time Russia tries to do another thing, they move even closer to the West. So it's doing exactly the opposite of what Putin wants. But it's already difficult to see how Putin can achieve his goal of extinguishing Ukrainian statehood and forcing a Russified Ukraine back into the Kremlin's exclusive sphere of influence. Instead, the war has dramatically accelerated long-term trends and widened the civilizational divide. And I think that's true. I think Russia sees Ukrainians as they're just like little Russians. Ukrainians say, no, Ukraine is not Russia. And I think that's the way that they're going to see it for generations. Now, with that being said, I think this article was terrifying to me because I think it's right. This is Foreign Affairs. Foreign Affairs is a very intellectual, well-developed academic journal. This is a little bit of hyperbole, but it makes the New York Times look like Mad Magazine. That's how deeply intentional and scholarly it is. So when they say the long war in Ukraine and they make their case for it, and I'm going to go through this with you, I think they're right. I mean, I hate to say it, I want the war to be over, but I think they might be right. Whenever the United States faces foreign policy crisis, critics claim that the U.S. government is doing either too much or not enough. The Ukrainian military has surprised everyone with its capacity to defend countrymen and even retake a good part of the territory it lost at the outset of the war. But ejecting Russian troops from all its territory, including Crimea, will be exceedingly difficult. Look, Ukraine may surprise us, and I hope that they do, but it is going to be a tough slog ahead. At the same time, Russian President Vladimir Putin has given no indication that he's prepared to give up his imperial dream. That's absolutely right. He is determined. At the same time, it would be just as difficult to convince the Ukrainian government to cede territories to a brutal occupying force in return for an uncertain peace. They shouldn't do it. I agree. Okay, let me move down a little bit further. The West needs to contemplate a world in which the conflict continues with neither victory nor peace in sight. In such a world, the United States and its allies will need to continue providing Ukraine with military support to defend against further Russian aggression. Despite the Biden administration's public unveiling of intelligence showing Moscow's preparation for an invasion, many were stunned that Russia used more than 175,000 troops to attack a neighboring country that had done it no harm, nor in any way constituted a threat to its security. Somebody said this yesterday. Look, I asked him, he was from Finland, and I said, so what was your perception like in Finland? And he said, well, we said, nah, Putin's just saber rattling. He's not going to invade. That's exactly what I was talking about with my colleagues in the cafeteria just before the invasion. It's like, no, that's not going to happen. There's no way he's going to do that. And Biden publicly unveiled this intelligence showing Moscow's preparations with their joint exercises with Belarus and we thought, of course, we've lifted the veil. You couldn't even do it if you wanted to at this point. The emperor has no clothes. We know what's going on. And I think Biden was convinced that that was going to be enough to do it. Unlike, Trump made some waves saying that Biden was encouraging Putin to go ahead and seize part. We're not going to intervene. I don't know that there's any grounds for that. So you can safely discount that statement. Now, let's think about military hardware. Shells, for example. In the past year, Ukraine has fired as many of them in a week as the United States can produce in a month. Similar shortfalls exist in more advanced weapons. Now, the good news is that Russia can't produce them any faster either. The bad news is Western partners are having a hard time trying to keep up as well. Then there's the danger of escalation. Moscow has repeatedly warned Washington not to send long-range missiles to Ukraine, including the MGM-140 ATACMS system, which has a range of 300 kilometers that could strike deep into Russian territory. U.S. President Joe Biden has consistently rejected calls to send these highly capable missiles to Ukraine, arguing that doing so would divide NATO and risk setting off a direct military confrontation with Russia. So Russia has deterred the United States. That's what's happened here. I hate to say that. Now, if a full military victory by Ukraine is unlikely anytime soon, the prospects for a negotiated peace seem even further off. So where are we? Where does that leave us? We neither have outright victory nor a negotiated peace likely anytime soon. The war will grind on for the foreseeable future. Russian defenses in the east and the south are solidifying along the 600-mile front line that now divides Russian and Ukrainian forces, and that's what's actively going on right now. Containment of Russia will require the West to maintain a strong deterrence posture, not just against military threats, but against threats to its own institutions and societies as well. This means that Europe will have to increase its defense spending more than it already has in response to Russian aggression in 2014, and they really do need to do that. As with his Soviet predecessors, Putin needs to be denied the ability to expand his evil empire, but Russia isn't going to disappear. The West needs a policy toward Kyiv and Moscow. It can't afford to have one and not the other. A free Ukraine is important to the West. It really is. A free Ukraine to not defend a democratic state that wants to be democratic right next to an authoritarian state is, foreign policy-wise, one of the most stupid things that the United States could possibly do. So this is an important thing. A free Ukraine is important to the West, and an imperial Russia remains a threat to Europe. But the article concludes by saying that as Washington is defending itself and helping Ukraine defend itself, it's likely to be a long and difficult war. I think he's right. It's going to be a long and difficult war. I don't see that we're going to be done in 2023, as much as I would love to be proven wrong. Let me move on to the next article. The U.S. House votes on rules that will restrain McCarthy's power. I talked about this in the comments. What's been going on in the House has been an intramural squabble between Republicans, and a lot of this has been focused on what I'm about to talk about. The U.S. House of Representatives will vote on Monday on the rules that will govern it for the next 2 years. Legislation includes several changes that will limit McCarthy's power, including allowing a single lawmaker to call for his removal at any time, and changes meant to sharply limit spending concessions that McCarthy agreed to win support from right-wing hardliners for his leadership bid. So the spending means defense spending, which is bizarre because Republicans are supposed to be the hawks, not the doves. So it's a bizarre kind of thing, but that's the populist wing within the Republicans. But the bigger issue was including allowing a single lawmaker to call for his removal at any time. This is what it was before Pelosi. Pelosi changed the rule, and their Republicans were changing it back. And so that was to provide some checks and balances. Other changes, including a 72-hour waiting period between when a bill is introduced and when it can get to a vote. That's important so that lawmakers have time to digest the bill rather than have things rammed through. That's a positive thing. And a cap on government spending at 2022 levels, that one I don't like because we're trying to support Ukraine. At least one Republican, Representative Tony Gonzalez, said proposed limits on defense spending, which he told CBS Sunday, was a horrible idea. I agree. When you have an aggressive Russia and Ukraine, you've got a growing threat in China and the Pacific. How am I going to look at our allies in the eye and say, I need you to increase your defense budget, but yet America is going to decrease ours? So it's not really decreasing. It's really just keeping it the same. But the point is still the same. The point is we actually shouldn't be doing that. The problem with this package is that it's muddied because all these things are combined in it. It's like the omnibus bill. If you wanted this thing, you had to hold your nose and vote for that thing. And we really shouldn't be in that position. But that's what's going to happen on Monday night. So some papers will breathlessly say tomorrow that they're voting against Ukraine. Well, maybe they were voting for those particular rules and not against. So it's hard to unpack what's going on. Okay, let's now turn our attention to fun with Russian state media. And while this article isn't exactly Russian state media, it's Yahoo News actually carrying a Reuters article, it is carrying Peskov's point. So Peskov wants to say the same thing again and again, that new deliveries of Western weapons, including French armored vehicles, to Kyiv would, quote, deepen the suffering of the Ukrainian people and would not change the course of the conflict. It actually might, but he wants to make that point, and he really wants to make that point. Stop doing this. You're just making it worse. These supplies can only add to the pain of the Ukrainian people and prolong their suffering. They are not capable of stopping us from achieving the goals of the special military operation, Peskov said. Okay, let's look at actual Russian state media. Russia's closest ally announces joint military drills. So the Belarusian Defense Ministry has announced that its joint training exercises with Russia. They do this all the time. Nothing to see here. Another one. Beijing deploys troops near Taiwan. China has announced a military exercise near Taiwan. Same kind of thing, except this is actually a legitimate threat of another place that it's not likely to happen, but if this does happen, and this would be Putin's absolute desire, he would relish this kind of thing, that China would engage here, because that would distract from what's going on in Ukraine, split the West into having to spend their resources on one side and the other simultaneously, make China a de facto ally in that sense. And I don't see it happening, but again, I'm just letting you know what's being carried. Okay, this one was actually fascinating for a bizarre reason. Russia may offer Ukraine a Korean scenario for special military operation to end. Here's a map of what they were proposing, or what somebody was proposing. Look at the area that is going to be the demilitarized zone, the Ukrainian demilitarized zone, and it goes all the way over to the coast, completely cutting Ukraine off along the sea here. I mean, it's just, it's really bizarre. I mean, it's hard to even understand why they're thinking that. And then the other thing is Galatia. What's this Galatia here? This United States kind of flag on here? Okay. So according to Alexei Danilov, Secretary of National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Moscow is considering several options for ending the conflict. One of them is a new 38th parallel. Of course, in the same article, Dmitry Peskov says this is not fair. No one talks about it. It's another hoax. In the same article, I'm not even sure why they put that on. Like, you can send any one message that you want in Russian. Is the message that you want to send that you're at odds with each other? Or I'm not exactly sure how that works. Okay, so thank you for your time. If you want to support Ukrainians, buy a mug or a hat or something to support a Ukrainian entrepreneur, or you can give directly to an organization like Samaritan's Purse, or you can give to United 24. All those links are down below. At any rate, if you like this, share and subscribe, or if you want to buy me a cup of coffee, I would appreciate that too. The last thing that I want to say is Dayaku Shoku V Bolivia Yeti za Ukrainiu. That's thank you for cheering for Ukraine. I appreciate your time, and we'll see you tomorrow.